for strangers stormed into an upscale restaurant, their eyes locked on a quiet black teenager dining alone. No one knew why they were after him, only that their anger was sharp enough to cut through the hushed chatter and clinking glasses. The boy didn't flinch as chairs scraped and gasps rippled across the room. What could a kid like him have possibly done to draw such fury? Moments later, the truth would leave every witness frozen in disbelief, and the attackers wishing they'd never raised a hand. Who was this young man they thought they could intimidate? 18-year-old Jordan Miles had learned to move through life quietly, even when the world insisted on noticing him for all the wrong reasons. A gifted student with a love for design, he'd spent the afternoon celebrating his early admission to an elite university, a dream he'd chased since childhood. His mother's proud smile still lingered in his mind as he stepped into a high-end downtown restaurant, a place he'd saved for and planned carefully, wanting to mark the moment in a space that felt special. The room glowed with warm light and soft music, but Jordan felt the usual undercurrent, the subtle glances, the way a server hesitated before seating him. He ignored it, the way he always did. Tonight was supposed to be about hope, not reminders. Across the room, a group of men had gathered near the bar. Their voices were low, but their stares weren't. Jordan caught the flicker of attention, a look that held more than casual curiosity. He turned back to his meal, steadying his breath. Outside, the evening traffic hummed, unaware of the storm that was quietly forming inside. Jordan had no idea that within minutes, his celebration would twist into something far darker, that the simple act of dining alone would become a test of courage, and that every person in that restaurant would soon be forced to confront a truth they'd rather ignore. Jordan barely noticed the first shove of a chair behind him. A sharp scrape of wood across cut through the music, drawing startled looks from nearby tables. He kept his eyes on the plate, willing the moment to pass. But then came heavy footsteps, for men closing in with the certainty of a decision already made. Their presence swallowed the soft ambience of the room. Conversations faltered. A fork clinked to the floor. Jordan felt it all, the sudden chill in the air, the weight of dozens of eyes, but he refused to flinch. He'd spent years training himself not to. One of the men stopped inches from his chair, towering over him. The smell of stale alcohol and anger mixed with the scent of roasted herbs from the kitchen. "This is our spot," the man said, his voice low but sharp enough to pierce every corner of the restaurant. Jordan said nothing. Silence, he'd learned, was sometimes its own defense. But silence can also be gasoline. Another man leaned closer, his shadow stretching across the table like a threat made flesh. A server hesitated at the edge of the scene, clutching a tray, eyes darting to the manager who stood frozen by the host's stand. No one moved to help. The quiet complicity of the room pressed down harder than the men themselves. The first shove came quick, a hand to Jordan's shoulder that rocked him against the table. A glass toppled, water spilling like a sudden storm across the white cloth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Still, Jordan kept his posture straight, his gaze forward. "Not so confident now, huh?" another voice taunted. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant, a reminder of a world that kept turning while this one constricted. Jordan's heart pounded, but his face stayed unreadable. Someone finally raised a phone, the faint red record light blinking in the corner of his vision. The men noticed. Their sneers hardened. The manager took a step forward, then stopped, words dying before they reached his lips. It was as if the entire restaurant had entered a collective paralysis, every person waiting to see how far the cruelty would go. Jordan's mind raced, not with fear, but with the memory of why he'd come here tonight, of the secret he carried that none of them could see. He knew that one move, one revelation, could turn this scene upside down. But timing mattered. Another shove, another taunt. And then, just as the tension reached a breaking point, Jordan slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The motion froze the men mid-breath. The crowd held a collective gasp. What he was about to reveal would change the balance of power in an instant. The restaurant seemed to shrink around Jordan as the men tightened their circle. Every second stretched, heavy with the threat of violence. The tallest lunged forward, gripping Jordan's jacket with a fist that smelled of sweat and stale beer. Chairs scraped as a few diners backed away, their eyes wide but their feet rooted to the floor. Jordan rose slowly, deliberate as a tide. He stood a full head taller than many in the room, but the men didn't flinch. One of them spat a slur so sharp it sliced through the silence. It hung there, ugly, undeniable, echoing against the polished walls. Something in the room cracked. A woman near the door whispered frantic prayer. Someone's phone fell with a hollow thud. Jordan reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small leather case. For a split second, the attackers stiffened, their bravado flickering. He placed it on the table with a quiet thump. The embossed crest caught the light, a symbol of wealth and power unmistakable to anyone who followed the city's headlines. Murmurs rippled. The manager's face drained of color. The men exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence unraveling. Jordan's voice finally broke the silence, calm and unshaken. "You should know who you're touching," he said, each word carrying the weight of generations. Recognition dawned, too late to erase what had been done. Cameras flashed, the crowd's paralysis lifting into a storm of whispers and recording lights. The men stepped back, but the damage was carved into the air, a scar no apology could heal. Jordan held their gaze, unblinking, while the room pulsed with a new awareness, the realization that power had shifted and that everyone present was now a witness to their own complicity. The four attackers, suddenly small, stood frozen as sirens wailed closer, an approaching reckoning no one could stop. Police arrived within minutes, but the echoes of a night would last far longer than the flashing lights. The four men were escorted out, their earlier bravado drained into silence as onlookers captured every step. Their faces, once full of swagger, were now pale with the weight of consequence. Jordan gave a statement calmly, but inside he felt a deeper ache, a reminder that no title, no wealth, no quiet celebration could shield him from a prejudice older than any fortune. The restaurant manager stumbled over apologies, offering comped meals and trembling words, but the harm was bigger than spilled water and broken dignity. In the days that followed, the story spread. Headlines called it an attack on a young billionaire, but Jordan knew that label missed the point. The outrage came not because he was rich, but because the world suddenly recognized the value of a life they'd been willing to dismiss. Friends reached out, strangers offered praise, yet he felt no victory. What lingered was the question of what might have happened if he'd been anyone else, another black teen without wealth or famous last name. How many similar nights passed unnoticed because no cameras were rolling? Jordan returned to his quiet work, more determined than ever to invest his resources into programs that challenged systemic racism. But he carried that evening with him like a scar, visible only to him, but impossible to forget. And as you watch this, ask yourself, how many stories like Jordan's end without justice, without witnesses, without a name to force accountability? Silence can be comfort, or it can be complicity. Tonight, it's a choice. What will you choose?